choose your wife or your mother. My family demanded these were the words that cut through me sharper than any blade after 35 years of putting everyone before myself after working 3 jobs in downtown Chicago, saving every single dollar I earned for my mom's medical bills and for the house in Evanston that I renovated brick by brick in the scorching summer of 1987 in sweat-stained shirts and torn jeans trying to make it perfect for her, but she barely glanced at the new windows that I installed myself because she said she liked the old ones even when they rattled in the wind. And the same night, I cooked my wife a birthday dinner for the first time in a decade, remembering her 42nd birthday. In 2019, we sat in the candlelight on 21st Street near the lakefront watching the traffic lights flicker, and I was exhausted from work. And she looked at me and said softly, "I feel like I barely know you anymore." And I nodded because I felt the same, but I didn't have the energy to fight now. My brother Mark was standing in the doorway of our living room with Mom, leaning on his arm, frowning, like she always did when I did something for someone else before her. And he repeated with venom, "Choose now, Mike, your mother or Sarah." And the words echoed like they were bouncing off every brick I had laid, and every late night I had spent driving her to the hospital, and every dollar I had given her for groceries and for the mortgage on that tiny blue house on Maple Avenue. And all I could hear was my own heart pounding in my ears and the tick of the old clock above the fireplace that I had repaired myself, and I could feel the texture of the carpet under my bare feet, the smell of the candle burning unevenly, and the taste of the last bite of Sarah's cake still on my tongue. And I knew in that moment everything I had built for everyone could collapse in one instant, and my hands were shaking. But I swallowed hard, and I looked for my mother who had always been my rock, but now was demanding obedience like a tyrant to my wife who had been my partner in every sleepless night, every mortgage payment, every doctor appointment. And I thought to myself, in 15 minutes, everything could change, and I promised myself I would find a way to survive this impossible choice, even if it meant defying everyone in that room. And I whispered under my breath, "You have no idea what's coming. And if you've ever been forced into an impossible choice, if you've ever felt every ounce of love you gave, question in an instant comment below, tell me what you would do in that moment, because what happened next would shatter all my expectations, and the truth about loyalty, family, and love will be revealed faster than I could ever imagine." I remember the summer of 1968 like it was yesterday, even though I was only 12 years old back then, living in a small 2-bedroom apartment on North Avenue. In Chicago, the smell of hot asphalt in the streets mixed with the aroma of Mom's spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove. I had saved $12.50 from delivering newspapers every morning before school to buy her a small bouquet of daisies because she had just turned 45, and I wanted her to feel special even though Dad had passed away too. Years earlier, leaving us with nothing but memories and unpaid bills, I remember walking past Mr. Henderson's corner store, hearing the jingling bell. As I pushed open the door and feeling the sticky candy wrappers under my fingers, I handed over the coins and watched her face light up with that rare smile she always tried to hide behind tired eyes. And from that moment, I knew I wanted to spend my life making her happy, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. When I turned 16, I worked evenings at the old diner on 47th Street, flipping burgers for $1.85 an hour, saving every penny to pay for my first car, so I could drive Mom to her doctor appointments and run errands she couldn't manage alone. She never asked for much, but I could see the strain in her shoulders, the way she hesitated before sitting down at the kitchen table, as if afraid to burden anyone. I never wanted her to feel that way, so I scrubbed floors in the diner while my friends went to movies and dances. And sometimes I'd come home at 11 p.m. exhausted and still make her a cup of chamomile tea before collapsing on the couch next to the record player, where I listened to Beatles and the Rolling Stones on vinyl with the volume low, so as not to disturb her sleep. I remember the first time I met Sarah in 1982. She was sitting in the small library on 12th Street in Evanston, reading a tattered copy of Pride and Prejudice. I must have tripped over a chair because I spilled her coffee, and she looked up at me with those piercing green eyes and laughed a little nervously. I apologized profusely and offered to buy her a new cup, and that was how it started. She didn't know how much responsibility I already carried, how many late nights I had driven Mom to the hospital in the winter of 1979, when she broke her hip on the icy steps in front of the Walgreens on Lincoln Avenue, how I had scraped together $3,200 from My savings to cover the co-payments and the ambulance ride while working 2 shifts at the factory in South. Loop, I wanted to share these memories with Sarah, but I also wanted to protect her from the weight of my obligations. So I smiled and joked about the coffee spill, and we talk about books, music, and dreams long into the evening. Sometimes I'd feel exhaustion in my bones after working 16-hour days for 3 straight weeks. But seeing Mom's relief when she got home from her night shifts and seeing Sarah's eyes sparkle when we talked about traveling to New York or San Francisco made every sacrifice feel worth it. I remember marking down every single payment I made for Mom's medical bills on a small notebook with red ink next to the addresses of her doctor's offices and pharmacies. I kept meticulous records of every dollar, spent $287.43 for X-ray at Lakeview Clinic, $192 for physical therapy sessions at Evanston Health Center, and I always remember the dates: August 12th, 1978, when she had her first heart scare, October 3rd, 1981, the day she was diagnosed with high blood pressure. These were the milestones of responsibility, the early lessons of sacrifice and love. And though sometimes I felt exhausted and underappreciated, I never admitted it, because I believed family came first. And when Sarah finally asked me to consider her dreams, as well, I nodded and promised I would find a balance. Little did I know that the balance I dreamed would be the very thing my family would demand I break for attention and allegiance, and in the following years, the choices I would be forced to make would test every value I had ever held. If you have ever felt torn between love and duty, leave a comment below and tell me how you handled it, because the story is only beginning, and you won't believe what happens next. By the time I turned 34, I had spent more than $47,652.87 on Mom's medical care alone since her hip surgery in 1979, counting every ambulance ride, every physical therapy session, every bottle of prescription pills. I drove her to Evanston Hospital every Wednesday at precisely 9:15 a.m. rain or shine, and sometimes even in blizzards when the wind cut through my coat like knives. I remember one particular morning, January 14th, 1989. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. after only 3 hours of sleep because I had stayed up all night assembling a wheelchair ramp for a front porch on Maple Avenue that would smell of fresh pine, sawdust, and paint, and my hands were raw and blistered from hammering nails into splintered boards. I remember her eyes filling with tears when she saw the ramp and saying, "Mike, you didn't have to do this." And I just smiled and said, "Mom, I want." But even then I felt a twinge in my chest because the smile didn't reach her eyes completely. I had also invested countless hours in helping Sarah with her dream. She wanted to open a small bookstore in Evanston on 19th Street, and I loaned her $14,500 from my savings account from Wells Fargo in downtown Chicago, telling her it was a gift, even though I would later remind her of the repayment schedule every month with receipts and spreadsheets that I personally created on my old Commodore 64 computer. The little details mattered to me: the smell of the ink on the printed receipts, the click of the keys as I typed out the dates, and amounts the soft hum of the computer fan in the background, every number a reflection of trust and love. But as the years went by, I began noticing subtle changes in my family. The first time I realized something was wrong was in the summer of 1995, during Mom's 62nd birthday. We had rented a small banquet hall at the Edgewater Hotel on Sheridan Road and invited all the relatives and neighbors, and I had paid $3,478.65 for the decorations, food, and cake, a triple-layer chocolate masterpiece with strawberries and cream from Giovanni's Bakery, and Mom had barely glanced at it. Instead, she muttered about how expensive it was and that I should save the money for more practical things. I remember feeling a sting in my chest, but I justified it, telling myself she only wanted what's best for me and my family. Then there were the times Sarah had complained quietly about feeling sidelined during family gatherings when I had to give my attention to Mom's needs. I remember August 21st, 1998, when we drove to Milwaukee for her annual cardiology checkup at Froedtert Hospital. I had to cancel dinner with Sarah's parents, and yet again she reassured me with a tight smile. "It's okay, Mike, I understand." But I saw the shadow in her eyes, the subtle disappointment, and I felt torn because every decision seemed to pull me in opposite directions, and my family began to take these sacrifices for granted. I could see in my brother Mark's expression when I told him I had transferred $2,000 to Sarah's bookstore account on February 12th, 2001 to cover new inventory. He raised an eyebrow and muttered under his breath, "Always taking care of someone else." And Mom barely said anything to acknowledge the effort, even when she noticed I spent 3 days preparing new shelves by hand, painting each with soft pastel yellow. To match the interior of the store, I had built the community garden with my own hands behind our townhouse complex on 17th Street in Evanston, planting tulips and daffodils that would bloom every spring for neighbors and friends, a scent of damp soil and fresh mulch filling the air, the laughter of children running through the flowers. Yet still the smallest gesture for me seemed invisible. I remember one evening in 2004 sitting on the porch, watching the sunset over Lake Michigan, the sky painted orange, and violet the distant hum of trains on the tracks below, and realizing that despite all the money I spent, $52,371.14 since 1979, despite every hour of sweat and every sleepless night that I had tried to honor both Sarah and Mom, the tension was simmering under the surface, and the first unmistakable signs of disrespect had begun. They started questioning my judgment, my choices, my loyalty. In subtle ways, I justified it to myself, thinking maybe it was stress, maybe aging, maybe just bad timing. But deep down, I knew it was something more. A storm was building, one I couldn't yet name. And if you have ever felt your good intentions, leave a comment below and tell me if it hurt, because what comes next will push everything to the breaking point, and the real challenge of loyalty and love begins, and you won't believe how cruel it becomes. It was October 3rd, 2007, when everything started unraveling at the Smithfield family gathering in downtown Chicago at the Old River's Edge Banquet Hall on 2150. North Halsted Street, the air thick with the smell of roasted turkey and mashed potatoes, and the faint echo of a jazz record playing softly in the corner. I had just handed Mom a slice of pumpkin pie topped with whipped cream. I had spent $134.76 on the dessert from Miller's Bakery across the street, and I carefully poured her coffee from the brand new silver coffee pot I had bought for $59.99 from Macy's for her birthday, and she barely glanced at it. Instead, she muttered, "You always try so hard for everyone else." And I felt the first sharp pang of humiliation. My brother Mark had taken upon himself to invite a few old neighbors from Evanston to the gathering, and they were sitting around the room whispering and staring. I could feel their eyes on me the way someone stares at a man who is expected to fail. I smiled politely at Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Collins, who had seen me grow up delivering newspapers at age 12. And then I heard Mark speak with that slow, cruel tone. "Mike, maybe it's time you start thinking about who really matters in your life." And my stomach sank. I tried to laugh it off, but Mom's eyes were cold for the first time ever, and I felt the tension crawling over my shoulders like icy fingers. Then came the next blow. My sister-in-law, Julie, snapped her fingers across the table and said, "Why do you always let Sarah control everything anyway? Shouldn't your mother come first?" The words hit like a hammer. I could feel the beat of my own heart in my temples. The chatter around me faded, and I could hear only the sound of my own breathing, and the faint tick of the antique clock behind the bar. My hands were shaking slightly, and I wanted to vanish into the carpet. The room felt too small. With everyone watching, I attempted to defuse the tension, saying, "Mom, I love you. I also love Sarah, and I'm trying to balance it all." But Mark leaned forward with a smirk and said, "Balance? You've always been weak, Mike. Why can't you just decide?" And the laughter from a few younger relatives made the sting worse. The smell of the roast beef was suddenly suffocating, and the polish of the table felt slippery under my fingers. I remembered every dollar I had spent renovating the kitchen at Mom's house, $5,876.34 for new cabinets, $2,192.50 for plumbing repairs, $463.80 for the tiles in the bathroom. I had worked for weeks sanding and staining every surface to perfection, and now it was dismissed with a shrug and a sneer. I noticed the neighbors whispering and filming little snippets on their phones. They were shocked like me, and I could see the text messages being sent instantly, as if the world had been reduced to judgment and ridicule in that room. I felt a tight knot in my chest, and my vision blurred for a moment. I wanted to shout and make them understand, but I restrained myself, breathing in the scent of coffee and pie, trying to stay calm. I remembered every morning I had woken up at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast before work every night. I had stayed up to help Mom with her bills every single time. I had stayed late at Sarah's bookstore helping her organize the shelves, all forgotten now under the weight of a few cruel words. Then came the phrase that cut deepest: "Choose Sarah or your mother, Mike, and make it quick." It wasn't a question. It was a demand, a cruel, unspoken punishment for caring too much, and my chest tightened as the room seemed to close and I glanced at Mrs. Henderson, whose eyes widened in silent horror at my family's callousness. I saw Mr. Collins shake his head slowly and whisper, "No one deserves this." And for a fleeting moment, I felt I wasn't alone, but the humiliation was real and sharp, and I could see it burning into every face in the room. I wanted to disappear. And at that exact moment, I promised myself that I wouldn't let this break me completely. I clenched my fists on the table and silently told myself I would find a way to stand tall. Even if everyone else tried to push me down, if you have ever been humiliated in front of people you trusted, leave a comment below and tell me how you felt. Because what comes next, the arrogance escalates and the cruelty becomes unbearable, and you will see how far people can push someone who loves too much. It was March 18th. 2012, and I had just returned from a business trip in New York City. The air in our Chicago townhouse on Elm Street was thick with the smell of Mom's lemon cookies fresh from the oven and the faint scent of polished oak from the dining table. I had refinished myself 2 summers ago after spending $1,245.67 on sandpaper varnish and brushes. I had barely stepped inside when Mark crossed his arms in the doorway and sneered. "So you're back from your little trip? How nice of you two. Finally show up for your family." And I felt the familiar sting, but tried to keep my composure. I greeted Mom, who was sitting in her armchair, knitting a scarf that I had bought her yarn for $38.92 at the Evanston wool shop, and she barely looked up, her eyes cold like ice, and said, "I hope you're ready to make a choice tonight, Mike." I felt the room shrink around me, and the laughter of Mark's friends echoed off the walls. He had invited half the neighborhood, including Mr. Jacobs from the hardware store and Mrs. Thompson from church, who had watched me grow up, and I could see their wide eyes and whispers passing like wind across dry leaves. What's going to happen? Will he finally decide? And my chest tightened as I realized this wasn't just about Sarah or Mom anymore. It was a public spectacle. I tried to explain calmly. I've always tried to do my best for everyone, but Mark cut me off with a sharp laugh. "Your best isn't good enough, Mike. Maybe you think you're generous, but in reality, you're weak." And the words were spit across the room like venom. I felt my hands clench into fists. I could hear the faint clicking of phones as people began recording and filming the confrontation. I felt the coarse texture of the carpet beneath my bare feet, and the bitter taste of coffee still lingering in my mouth in the cup I had poured for Mom 10 minutes earlier. I had spent 3 full days cleaning and organizing the house for her birthday, and now it was dismissed like dirt on the floor. Then came the worst part. Mom spoke in that icy voice that I had once adored. "Mike, you have to choose your wife or your mother. I won't watch this indecision anymore." And the words cut deeper than any blade I could imagine. I felt every ounce of sweat and blood from 35 years of sacrifice pulsing through my veins as anger and despair collided. I remembered every dollar spent on her medical bills, $52,371.14, every hour spent driving her to clinics and hospitals, every sleepless night working multiple jobs to cover her needs while trying to keep Sarah's dreams alive. I remembered the paint on the walls of her bedroom that I had applied myself, the faint scent of fresh varnish filling the room. I remembered Sarah's gentle voice whispering, "I know you're doing your best." And yet here I was exposed, humiliated, and publicly shamed for caring too much. The neighbors were all watching, some shaking their heads in horror, some whispering, "He deserves better." But the damage was done. Mark laughed louder and said, "Decide now or lose everything." And the room felt like a trap of walls closing, and my heart pounded in my ears. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, the bitter smell of lemon cookies mixed with the stale scent of tension. I could see Julie smirking from the corner, holding her phone up recording, and I knew this moment would haunt me if I didn't act soon. And that's when the first spark of anger flared within me. The moment I realized I would not allow myself to be reduced to a puppet under my family's cruel games. I clenched my jaw and my fist tight and felt the power of decades of patience and sacrifice coiling in my chest. I whispered under my breath, "Enough. If you have ever been pushed to your limit and felt completely humiliated, comment below and tell me how it felt, because the storm is about to break, and what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about loyalty, family, and respect." It was a rainy night on September 12th. 2015, when everything finally became crystal clear. I had just returned from a long day at a law firm in downtown Chicago, the streets glistening with rain, slick reflections of neon lights, and car headlights splashing against the sidewalks. I opened the door to our Evanston home on Maple Avenue. The scent of wet leaves mixed with Mom's faint perfume lingered in the air, and I felt the familiar weight of expectation pressing on my shoulders. I had been silent during the last few family confrontations. The words, "choose your wife or your mother," still echoing in my mind, and I realized for the first time that my silence had been mistaken for weakness. I sat in the worn leather chair by the fireplace, the flame flickering and casting uneven shadows across the room. And I noticed how small the room felt, how suffocating the walls had become from years of unspoken resentments. And I breathed in slowly, the faint aroma of coffee lingering from the cup I had poured from Mom earlier, and I felt a strange calm wash over me, as if decades of sacrifice and humiliation had condensed into a single moment of clarity. I remembered every dollar spent, $52,371.14 on Mom's medical bills, every late night spent sanding the floors in her house, every sleepless night, helping Sarah organize her bookstore in Evanston, every tear shed for both of them. And suddenly I saw that my efforts were never truly unappreciated. It was never the sacrifices themselves that mattered, but how I allowed others to control the narrative of my life. And I realized that I had been invisible not because I lacked value, but because I'd allowed people to underestimate me for too long. The flicker of the fireplace illuminated the stack of documents I had collected over the years: receipts, letters, emails, financial statements. And I saw for the first time the power of my own hands of control I had over evidence, over truth, over the reality of my sacrifices. And in that moment, I straightened my back and felt a shift in my spine, like a spring releasing tension, years of subservience and obedience finally uncoiling. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, the muscles of my face relaxing, yet my eyes sharpening. And I whispered under my breath, "No more." And the words resonated through the empty room like a warning signal. The rain tapped rhythmically against the window panes, a drumbeat of change. And I knew that the next time my family demanded obedience, they would meet a different man, one who had patience, but not endless tolerance. I reviewed the files in front of me, the detailed records of every dollar, every sacrifice, every overlooked effort, and I realized that the tools to reclaim my dignity had been in my hands. All along, I could feel a subtle smile forming despite the tension, a quiet satisfaction that came from understanding my worth and my power, that no one had truly diminished. I knew that the next confrontation would not break me. It would be the moment when the tables would start to turn. The tension in the air felt electric, as if the house itself sensed the awakening inside me. I poured myself another cup of coffee, savoring the aroma of the heat against my palms, and the quiet promise of a new chapter. The time for silence was over. If you have ever experienced that sudden clarity, when you realize you have more control than you thought, comment below and share, because what comes next is not just a decision, it's a transformation, and you will see how one man can stand tall against years of injustice. It was March 22nd, 2016, in our Evanston townhouse on Maple Avenue. I woke up at 5:12 a.m. The faint hum of the city outside mixing with the soft ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace. The air smelled faintly of wet paint from the shelves I had been refinishing for Sarah's bookstore that would smooth and warm under my hands. I sipped my black coffee from the chipped ceramic mug I had bought at a flea market in 1984 and felt the weight of every past sacrifice settling into resolve. I reviewed the meticulous records I collected over decades: receipts, letters, emails, spreadsheets, every single expense from $287.43 for x-ray at Lakeview Clinic, $192 for physical therapy sessions, $14,500 loan to Sarah for her bookstore renovations. Every dollar, every hour, every sleepless night laid bare before me, and for the first time I didn't feel the burden of responsibility. I felt the power of control. I began drafting my strategy, quietly moving from room to room, imagining the confrontation come, rehearsing my words and responses with surgical precision. I could feel the tension in my muscles coiling into readiness. I put on my dark navy suit, the fabric crisp and smooth against my skin, the smell of my cologne mingling with the scent of rain-damp streets outside. And I felt a calm authority settle over me, the calm before the storm. I went through every possible scenario in my head, each question mark or Mom might throw at me, each whisper or sneer from the neighbors, and I knew exactly how I would respond. Every move calculated, every word deliberate. I glanced at Sarah asleep on the couch in her sweater from the Evanston wool shop. I had bought her last winter, $72.56, soft and warm, and realized that protecting her was part of my strategy, not a weakness, but a weapon of truth and justice. I thought about the neighbors, Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Collins, who had watched me struggle and saw the raw cruelty of my family's demands. I knew their eyes would witness my dignity restored. I took another slow sip of coffee, feeling the warmth fill my chest, and with a quiet smile began to form my hand, steady my mind, clear my heart, resolved I would no longer bend under manipulation. I could see Mark in the dining room in my mind's eye, the arrogance on his face, the smug satisfaction, thinking he controlled the narrative, but he had miscalculated. He had underestimated decades of patient strategy and preparation. And I whispered, under my breath, "Tonight the story changes. The rain tapped a steady rhythm against the windows like a drum signaling that the time for action was near. I packed the evidence files into my leather briefcase, every document organized, every receipt numbered, every email, printed the tangible proof of years of loyalty and sacrifice that no one had acknowledged until now. I walked past the fireplace, feeling the texture of the polish under my fingertips, and sensed the atmosphere shifting in the house, the air thick with anticipation, even though no one else knew it. Yet I could feel the quiet shift in my posture, the confidence radiating outward like an invisible shield. I knew that when the confrontation came, this calm authority would speak louder than any argument. My lips curved in a small, knowing smile. I had finally embraced my power, and nothing would catch me off guard from this moment. Forward the tables were turning. And if you have ever prepared yourself silently for a confrontation that would change everything, comment below and tell me how it felt. Because the real reversal is coming, and it will leave everyone stunned. It was June 7th, 2017 at precisely 6:45 p.m. in the Smithfield townhouse on Maple Avenue. I had invited my family over under the pretense of a casual dinner. The air smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary from the chicken I had marinated for hours at the Evanston Farmers Market, the wood of the dining table polished to a warm shine from my painstaking work, the soft hum of the ceiling fan mixing with the distant sound of traffic outside, the rain from earlier, leaving the streets glossy and reflective. I served the first plates and watched Mom reach the chicken first, her eyes darting to me for approval, and I held her gaze calmly for the first time in decades. I saw Mark leaning back in his chair, smirking, thinking he still controlled the narrative, and Julie whispering something under her breath, recording on her phone. I let the silence stretch like a taut rope before I spoke. "Before we start eating, I want to show you something." I opened my leather briefcase carefully and placed it on the table, the soft clink of the buckles against the wood resonating in the room. I pulled out the first set of documents, meticulously organized spreadsheets of every dollar. I had spent $52,371.14 on Mom's medical bills, $14,500, for Sarah's bookstore, $5,876, and 34 cents for kitchen renovations, for $163.80 on bathroom tiles, each receipt perfectly aligned chronological records, every letter, every email, every note written during sleepless nights, and I watched their faces as realization began to creep in. Mom's hands shook slightly as she adjusted her glasses, Mark's jaw tightened, and Julie's phone wavered in her grip. As Mrs. Henderson gasped quietly, "Oh my," I began to speak calmly but with authority. "I have spent my life caring for both of you, balancing your needs and the dreams of the woman I love. Every decision, every sacrifice is documented and undeniable." I could see the first flicker of panic in Mark's eyes, the arrogance beginning to crack the confidence he wore like armor was showing subtle fractures. I watched as the neighborhood witnesses I had invited discreetly earlier leaned forward, their expressions of disbelief and astonishment registering silently in the room, and I continued. I kept every record, not to boast, but to ensure the truth could never be twisted or denied, and tonight the truth will be clear to everyone. Mom's voice trembled slightly. "Mike, I didn't realize," and I held up a finger to pause her apology. "Not yet, Mom, this is just the beginning." I displayed the bank statements, the emails from Sarah acknowledging the loans and gratitude for my support, the photos of the renovated kitchen, and the wheelchair ramp, the receipts from every medical appointment, every therapy session, every taxi fare, every bottle of pills I had bought with my own hands, and the room fell silent. The neighbors whispered among themselves, "I can't believe this all these years." And I could see the first signs of Mark's arrogance collapsing, his lips pressed tight, his shoulders stiffening, his posture betraying the realization that he had underestimated me for decades. I leaned back slightly in my chair, feeling the power coiling like a spring inside me, the calm before the full revelation complete, and I said softly but firmly, "Now you see the reality of what I've done, not because anyone asked, but because it was right." And in that instant I could feel the tension shift, the air charged with anticipation, the witnesses sensing the turn of events, and the first tremors of justice beginning to take shape. And if you have ever revealed the truth at a moment when everyone doubted you, comment below and tell me how it felt, because what comes next will confirm the full magnitude of what they never expected. It was June 7th, 2017, still at the dinner gathering in our Evanston townhouse on Maple Avenue, the evening deepening with the soft golden light from the chandelier casting long shadows across the polished oak floors. I had laid down myself years ago, the smell of rosemary and roasted chicken still filling the air and the faint hint of Mom's perfume lingering like a ghost in the corners. I opened the next set of documents from my leather briefcase, carefully each envelope sealed and labeled by year. 1979 through 2016, I pulled out the first letter from my financial advisor at Wells Fargo, confirming the loans and gifts to Sarah totaling $14,500, with interest calculations and repayment schedules, meticulously noted every line a testament to my honesty and diligence. Next came the photos of the renovated kitchen in Mom's Evanston home, the freshly painted walls pastel. Yellow, the handmade shelves aligned perfectly, every nail and brushstroke account for the original receipts, totaling $5,876.34. The texture of the wood visible even in the photos, and I could see Sarah's face in each one, smiling with genuine gratitude. As I laid each piece on the table, the room grew deathly silent. Mark's jaw dropped, his shoulders sagging, as if he'd been punched from within. Mom's hands trembled, and she reached out to touch the papers. Unable to speak, her eyes wide with shock, Julie lowered her phone, slowly realizing she'd been recording a narrative she hadn't understood. And Mrs. Henderson whispered, This is incredible. And I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Every sacrifice, every dollar, every late night, every tear, every moment of my life spent ensuring the happiness and health of both my mother and my wife is documented and undeniable. I could see the full realization dawning on Marcus' smirk, completely gone, replaced by a rigid mass of disbelief and fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His arrogance shattered completely. And for the first time in decades, he realized he had underestimated me. The neighbors leaned in closer, their expressions of awe and shock tangible. In the quiet room, the power had shifted irrevocably, and I continued, This is not about money or control. It is about respect. It is about honesty and loyalty. And tonight the truth is undeniable. Mom's voice finally broke through, trembling. Mike, I never knew how much you did for us. And I nodded calmly, a faint smile forming. Now you know. I could see the tension leave my shoulders, replaced by a calm authority. The room charged with electricity as the witnesses understood the scale of what had been hidden from them. Mark's eyes flicked to Sarah, and then to me, the realization complete that his attempts to manipulate and humiliate had failed utterly. The balance of power finally restored. The humiliation he tried to impose on me reflected back on him for all to see. I had transformed from the obedient son to the orchestrator of truth. The subtle strength I had nurtured over decades finally fully revealed, and in that instant I knew the turning point was complete. The witnesses' gasps and murmurs of approval filled the space, the evidence irrefutable, control undeniable, and I whispered softly under my breath, The story has changed. If you have ever revealed the full truth in a moment of confrontation, share below, because this is the moment when years of patient strategy and sacrifice become undeniable, and the people who doubted you see your strength for the first time. It was June 8th, 2017, the morning after the revelation. The air in Evanston was crisp with the scent of wet grass from overnight rain and the faint aroma of baked bread from the corner bakery on Maple Avenue. I woke at 6:02 a.m. feeling an unfamiliar lightness in my chest, a tension that had weighed on me for decades, replaced by quiet satisfaction. I reviewed the messages and calls that had started pouring in from neighbors and witnesses. Mrs. Henderson texted, I can't believe what I saw last night. You have more courage than anyone I know. Mr. Collins left a voicemail acknowledging the injustice he had observed, and Sarah's messages were full of gratitude and love, the support tangible and immediate. I knew the shift had begun that very morning. My phone buzzed at 7:17 a.m. A call from our family attorney, confirming that Mark's attempts to challenge my authority over shared family matters and financial decisions were now legally untenable. Every document I had presented last night fully verified and binding. I spent the next few hours walking through the neighborhood, aware of the whispers behind closed doors, the neighbors exchanging glances and murmuring about the confrontation, and the undeniable truth revealed to everyone. Even local business owners mentioned it. Mr. Jacobs from the hardware store shook my hand firmly. Never seen someone stand up like that. And I felt the satisfaction of justice beginning to manifest visibly. I drove past my mother's house on Lincoln Avenue and saw her standing on the porch with a softened expression, waving at me. I waved back and noticed a small note pinned to her bulletin board. Mike, thank you for everything. I never realized A tangible acknowledgement of years of overlooked sacrifices. By 9:45 a.m., Julie finally posted a video snippet online, intended to humiliate me the moment Mark demanded I choose, but the response had shifted the narrative. The comments flooded in support of me. Finally, someone stood up. Truth always prevails. And I realized the humiliation being thrown at me the night before had fully inverted onto the very people who tried to control me. Mark's colleague at work had heard about the event and started questioning his credibility. The whispers at the office spreading that he had publicly humiliated his own brother, only to be undone by decades of documented sacrifices and integrity. I received a call from the local community board asking me to speak at the next neighborhood meeting about integrity and fairness in family disputes. A recognition I never sought, but deeply valued. I watched from the kitchen window the street below, the neighbors shaking their heads and whispering. He finally showed them who he is. And for the first time, I felt completely validated, not by money or recognition, but by the acknowledgement of truth and justice. In real time, my mother finally sat down at the table and handed me a small cup of coffee, without words or eyes, saying everything the air in the room light and warm. The past 35 years of unrecognized effort finally acknowledged. I looked around and saw Sarah's proud smile and knew the fight for balance and loyalty was just beginning. But for the first time, the scales were tipping decisively in my favor. And if you have ever seen justice served right, before your eyes, comment below and tell me how it felt, because what follows will show the full impact of setting things right. It was June 12th, 2017, and the aftermath of the revelation had rippled through the neighborhood, and beyond. The air in Evanston was thick with the scent of blooming lilacs along Maple Avenue, and the faint hum of traffic from downtown to morning light casting a warm glow on our townhouse. As I prepared for the day, I reviewed the messages and calls that had poured in since the dinner event to support overwhelming and immediate neighbors, friends, even strangers sharing their disbelief and admiration. Mrs. Henderson sent a long email detailing how she had witnessed Mark's arrogance over the years, and how finally someone had confronted it with undeniable proof. Mr. Collins had spoken to several local news outlets recounting what he saw and emphasizing the meticulous documentation. I had presented the impact was real and measurable. By 9:17 a.m., I received a call from a community lawyer confirming that Mark's attempts to assert control over shared family properties and finances were legally invalid. The documents I had provided were binding and unassailable. Julie's phone video, once intended to humiliate me, had gone viral. An overwhelming majority of viewers praising my courage and integrity. The comment section flooded with, "Finally, someone stood up. Truth always prevails. This is how family should act." And I realized the public narrative had completely shifted the tables, turned. The very arrogance and cruelty that Mark had displayed now reflected back on him in every conversation and text message circulating through the community. The humiliation he had tried to impose on me had been amplified in reverse. In real time, the neighbors watched as his credibility crumbled. He could no longer control the narrative. The support for me only intensified. My mother finally acknowledging the years of unrecognized sacrifices openly praised me in front of the community. Mike has always done what's right for everyone, quietly and selflessly. And I felt a profound sense of vindication. The air in the house warm and light, the smell of brewed coffee comforting and grounding. I watched Sarah smiling softly and realized the full impact of the reversal, not just personally, but socially. The system of expectation and manipulation that had oppressed me for decades had been exposed and dismantled. I sent a series of emails to family members and community leaders documenting the events and the evidence, ensuring that no one could ever twist the story again. I walked down Maple Avenue later that day, feeling the texture of the wet pavement beneath my shoes. Neighbors nodding, shaking hands, whispering words of support and admiration. The transformation was complete. Mark's attempts at control and intimidation fully reversed. The consequences immediate and far-reaching. The balance of power restored permanently. The lessons of loyalty, integrity, encourage evident to all who witness the events. And if you have ever seen injustice reverse in real time, share below, because the power of patience, preparation, and truth can create consequences that echo far beyond what anyone imagined. It was June 20th, 2017, just over a week after the confrontation. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows of our Evanston townhouse, casting golden stripes across the hardwood floors. I sat at the kitchen table sipping black coffee from the chipped ceramic mug I had cherished since 1980, for the smell of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery still faint in the air, and I felt a calm I hadn't known in decades, a deep sense of completion and empowerment that comes only after facing years of injustice. And finally, standing tall, I looked around at the house, the polish with the table, the photos of my family, the certificates and letters that had once been ignored and dismissed, now recognized as a testament to a life lived with integrity. The transformation was not just external, but internal. I could feel it in my posture, the subtle ease of my shoulders, the clarity of my mind. The decades of patience, sacrifice, and courage had coalesced into a permanent sense of strength and dignity. I reflected on the lessons learned. Loyalty and love are vital, but self-respect and the courage to set boundaries are non-negotiable. I realized that you can give your heart completely, but still maintain the power to protect it, and that standing up for yourself does not diminish your love for others. It enhances it. I watched Sarah walking to the living room, the soft wool of her sweater brushing against her arms, the sunlight catching the strands of her hair, and I felt gratitude for her unwavering support. Her quiet strength had amplified my courage and reminded me that shared love does not mean surrendering to injustice. I looked to my mother, who had finally acknowledged my sacrifices, her eyes soft and full of understanding, and realized that healing and recognition can come even after decades of unspoken tension. I took a deep breath and felt the energy of every neighbor, every witness, every supporter who had silently validated my courage, their encouragement forming an invisible web of support around me. And I thought about you, the viewer, sitting there perhaps in your own home, dealing with a family dilemma, a professional injustice, or a long-standing conflict. And I want you to know that you too can transform your story with patience, preparation, and courage. I invite you to reflect on your own experiences, comment below, and share your story of perseverance and revelation. If this video inspired you, share it with someone who needs to see that change is possible. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, and activate the bell for more stories that empower and expose truth in every corner. Join our community of viewers who value integrity and courage. And remember, you can love fully without sacrificing your dignity. The journey of injustice can end in empowerment. The storms of family conflict can reveal your hidden strength, and the story that once seemed impossible to change can be rewritten by your choices. The final thought I want to leave you with is this: you may have been silenced, overlooked, or manipulated in the past, but your voice, your courage, and your truth are powerful beyond measure. Never let anyone dictate your worth ever again. And now it's your turn. Take a stand in your life. Face the injustices with the knowledge that preparation, integrity, and courage can transform your world. Comment below, subscribe, share, and remember that your story is just beginning, and it can be one of triumph.